Hello, everybody. The session will begin very shortly. We'll just wait for everybody to join. So good afternoon from London, everybody, and welcome to this Global Government Forum webinar, looking at the mega trends that are shaping the future of government. I'm Siobhan Benita, I'm Global Government Forum's event moderator, and in this session, Global Government Forum's executive editor, Richard Johnstone, and I will share some information that we hope will help you to understand the issues shaping government's priorities over the coming year and beyond. And it's safe to say there's certainly a lot to discuss. So public services around the world are dealing with what many government leaders are calling the age of polycrisis. With conflicts still raging in Ukraine and Gaza, the economic and social impacts of the COVID pandemic still being felt, shifting geopolitics, changing demographics, global warming, and I could go on and on, the context for public service delivery is challenging, to say the very least. And 2024 is already being characterised as a year of change, with more than half the people on the planet living in countries that will hold nationwide elections. And it's the first year in which this milestone has been reached. In looking at the trends that will shape the coming year in government, we're going to cover four broad areas today. So that's the economy and the public finances, boosting public service innovation, sustainability and resilience, and digital transformation and AI. But I don't just want it to be Richard and myself talking. We'd love to hear all of your thoughts and questions on these topics as well. So please do submit any thoughts, comments, questions that you have using the Q&A function in the Zoom chat. You should be able to see a Q&A button on whichever device you're using, and we'll get to as many of those comments and questions as we can before the end of the session. But in each of the four areas that I mentioned, we'll discuss some of the key lessons that we've learned from the work that Global Government Forum has done. And we will share information on how we can work with you as our knowledge partners to both share your expertise with our network of over 300,000 public and civil servants, and for Global Government Forum to provide you with valuable insights for your businesses. But before we get on to the trends, a little word about Global Government Forum, or GGF itself. So we're a media company that brings together public and civil servants from around the world to share their challenges and solutions with their peers. GGF's engagement and collaboration platforms are designed to amplify your organisation's reach and foster meaningful connections with public servants globally, regionally, or nationally. And we do this in a whole host of different ways across a number of areas. And don't worry, I know there's a lot of information going to be coming your way in the next couple of minutes, but we will make all of these slides available to all of you after the session. So some of our key channels are on the slide that you can see now, but here's just a little bit more detail on each of those. So we hold summits that bring together the heads of civil services and digital and finance functions from different countries in an intimate roundtable format under the Chatham House rule to have very frank and open conversations about the challenges of modern government. These really are special events with the most senior officials from those countries, and they provide unique opportunities for knowledge partners to take part. We also organise and run conferences that bring together public service leaders to share insights on how governments are innovating to meet those major public policy challenges, like the drive to net zero and digital transformation. And these are events where knowledge partners can connect and share their expertise and insights with the delegates. We undertake research and thought leadership, including using our extensive global network of senior officials to gain insights on the issues that public servants are really prioritising around the world. We also do digital publishing, including an email bulletin providing information to officials around the world. You can see lots of information about the other publishing that we do on the slide. We host podcasts sharing the very best of public service leadership from current and former civil servants. And we will soon be launching a weekly podcast looking at the big news stories every week and what they mean for public servants, all of which have sponsorship opportunities. If we get time at the end, I can also ask Richard about a podcast series that we've done on digital transformation as well in government. And we run webinars and other online events where public service experts in different countries come together with knowledge partners from the private sector to discuss policy development and implementation detail in policy areas such as digital transformation, action to get to net zero, and how to get the right skills into government. And last but not least, we run public sector training, which builds on our ethos of providing high quality events and information for civil servants around the world. And as we go through all of the trends, we'll highlight a few of the knowledge partner opportunities linked to some of these activities for your company to get its message out to this exclusive audience. But for more information on the full range of these opportunities, you can contact our colleague. So the details, I think, are there, Matt Hoare, who's the Media Sales Director for Global Government Forum, and there's the address there on the screen. But as I say, we will be sending you all of this information. And then very finally, before we get on to the trends themselves, I just want to highlight why companies like yours are already using GGF to connect with our public sector networks. So we are trusted with an unrivaled reputation as an enabler of public service best practice and for providing safe spaces for very frank and open collaboration and engagement. We're authoritative, guided by our unique understanding of the public sector, which is reinforced by real-world data and regular input and advice from senior public leaders around the world. We have a great network of people who we work with on a regular basis. We're impartial with inclusive and impartial coverage across borders, boundaries, and cultures, and that impartiality really lies at the heart of GGF's mission. We're innovative, so really at the forefront of developing innovative engagement channels that yield great results, from digital media to creative public service competitions and unique thought leadership initiatives. And of course, we are global. That's in our name. We're the only public service engagement partner covering every region of the world and reaching over 320,000 public officials. So just to highlight that and provide some more detail, here's that breakdown of GGF's global reach across more than 200 countries, as you can see. And in the next slide, you'll see how this network brings together the types of people. So we've got senior decision makers, we've got budget holders. In the public sector, we've got requirement setters and specialists from across all departments, agencies, and professional areas. So that's kind of it, a very quick run through. But to find out more of what we're doing, please visit globalgovernmentforum.com, or you can follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn, or ask us questions once we've both finished today, and we can give you a bit more information. But now let's get into those trends. And I'm going to start with asking Richard to set out the trends on economy and public finances. Over to you, Richard.
Great. Thanks, Siobhan, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this session. As Siobhan said, it's a very interesting year ahead with all the elections and much beside that's going on in governments around the world. And when we did this session this time last year, I highlighted that the lights on the global economic dashboard were lit up red. Economic forecasts have been cut, inflation was high in many countries, and interest rates were high and indeed going up across the globe. Looking back now with hindsight of 12 months, I think that the global economy perhaps had a softer landing in 2023 than had initially been projected. I think a global recession was avoided, and certainly in big economies like the UK and the US, inflation came down pretty quickly, I think quicker than a lot of economic projections. But it's not all rosy in its projections for this year. The World Bank has highlighted that the global economy will only grow 2.4% in 2024, which is lower than actually it grew last year, 2.6%. And it calculates that that would mean the weakest half decade of economic growth for the 5 years up to 2024 in more than 30 years. And this all amounts to the risk, according to the World Bank, that the 2020s could be a decade of wasted opportunities. And that's obviously a decade that we're already almost halfway through. And this has a big impact on the work of government, and the economic situation in many countries is, of course, a key factor in those elections that Siobhan mentioned. It will be a key electoral battleground in many countries. And we've already seen some of that in some of the elections that were held last year. In New Zealand, for example, both the then Labour government and the opposition National Party set out plans in their election manifestos to reduce public spending, and the new national-led coalition government that has taken over has set out some pretty big public spending reduction plans following that election. So we've already begun to see that the impact in terms of electoral politics as we look to the year ahead. And many incumbent governments have begun to kind of reduce spending too, due to these economic headwinds. In Canada, the government has already announced £500 million, £500 million Canadian dollars, sorry, of in-year cuts to government spending, and it wants to save over 15 billion in Canadian dollars over 5 years on government spending. So there's a big program there to rationalise spending. While in the UK, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has capped the size of the UK civil service at its current level as part of an efficiency drive, and hopes to get the number of civil servants back down to pre-pandemic levels. But again, the election will intervene in the UK, and public finances will be another big electoral issue. So yeah, the financial picture that governments face is quite a constrained one. They're having to plan for low economic growth in the years ahead, and as Michael Vernick, the former Cabinet Secretary in the Government of Canada and now the Chair of Public Sector Management at the University of Ottawa, has said it, has said to GGF previously, we're now in a period of kind of tapping the brakes and fiscal correction in government after a period of large spending in response to the pandemic. This seems to be the period of correction that is now taking place around the world. And as I said, that is leading to efforts to boost efficiency. I already mentioned the plans in Canada to reduce in-year spending, which is all trying to come from efficiency savings. The UK government has launched its own efficiency drive, which again, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt set out the details of. The plan is to increase public sector productivity by 0.5% a year, which in Jeremy Hunt's calculations, the Treasury's calculations, would match the growth in public sector productivity to the projected increase in spending that governments are going to have to implement in the years ahead, due to some of the big societal factors, of which net zero and an ageing population are among them. So there's the kind of short-term pressures of the impact of low economic growth, and then there are the medium to long-term pressures that are coming closer on the timelines of big trends like an ageing population and net zero. And what the UK is really trying to do is to boost public sector productivity to match the increase in spending that they're going to see. So that is very difficult work to do, and it's very difficult work to do in a tight fiscal environment, and it requires work to increase government capability as well, which we will touch on in the next slide with Siobhan in a moment. But that's kind of a broad overview of where we are in terms of the public finances. If you just go back a slide, then these are some of the knowledge partner opportunities that we have linked to finance. We've mentioned net zero. We've got a session coming up on how to fund net zero and how governments can make the investment that they need to make to reduce carbon emissions and to boost resilience, which again we will touch on later in the session. We've got a session looking at how to cut government spending in a way that protects services. What is best practice around the world in terms of reducing public spending? We will share insights from governments that have done it. And last on that list is the Global Government Finance Summit, which will be held this year in June in Dublin, where, as Siobhan said, it's one of our summits. We will bring together top public treasury officials to discuss how they get out of this bind, because I think they are in a very difficult situation at the moment. And to share some more light on how governments might get out of this bind, I'll hand over to Siobhan on public service innovation.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so as you said, innovation is one of the ways I think that governments are looking to kind of become more productive, to become more efficient in what they do. So as you said, this belt tightening in government is coming at a time when the challenges that governments are facing, so everything from revolutionizing services to meet the digital age, to delivering on those challenges, those ongoing long-term challenges like meeting net zero and preparing for aging populations, those challenges have never been greater. So dealing with the officials around the world that we're seeing that they're having to change the way they operate to try and meet these challenges, including, for example, embracing new technology, working across departmental and other silos in ways they've never done before to reduce inefficiencies, taking managed risks to test creative approaches, and then really embracing flexible and hybrid ways of working, which were there before the pandemic, but are certainly now a legacy of COVID. GGF can help governments and officials to meet these challenges, and one noteworthy way that we do this is through hosting the annual Innovation Conference in London. This year it's being held on the 19th to the 20th of March at the Excel Centre in London. Innovation is co-hosted by the UK government, the UK Civil Service and the Cabinet Office. And it's a unique exhibition and conference that brings together government leaders from across the globe. So we have fantastic speakers coming in from all around the world. And they're speakers who are responsible for the transformation of their public sector organisations and services. So really looking at that, how do they do things differently to try and meet these challenges with the kind of limited resources that they have? And the key topics that are going to be covered across the Innovation Conference this year, so they've already been decided, they are innovation. You can see that innovation in government delivery, innovation in skills, in artificial intelligence and machine learning, in sustainability, digital and data, in relocation, and innovation in cyber. And as I said, that conference will take place over 2 days. And sessions covering each of those topics are going to see these leaders from around the world taking the stage to really share their insights and their best practice with the people who are in the room, but also maybe share some thoughts on the things where they're finding it difficult and where they are experiencing some of those challenges. So if you'd like to find out how you can be part of this flagship event, please do get in touch with us, one of our commercial team, or as I say, post a comment or a question after this, and we can start that conversation. I should also mention here that in autumn last year, GGF launched the first ever free global network for women public servants. So an example of some of the things that we're doing, being more creative. And this network provides opportunities for women to advise and support each other as they navigate their careers. And the network is underpinned by exclusive news, opinion, analysis, and events. So there are also knowledge partner opportunities linked to this network's programme of work, everything from kind of digital content to supporting webinars and in-person events. But being more innovative also requires governments to really fundamentally rethink how they work. And in response to requests from public service leaders around the world. So we had public service leaders together in one of our events last year, and they kind of asked, it was in particular, it was Donna, who is the head of the civil service in Barbados, said it would be really helpful for her if there was kind of a blueprint for an effective modern public service. She would have loved to have that when she took up her role. So GGF, we went away and we've begun to develop that blueprint for an effective modern public service. And the report, which is called the Making Government Work, Identifying the Features of a Modern Effective Public Service, is going to be published in March at that innovation conference. And this report was developed through in-depth interviews. So following that request, we undertook in-depth interviews with serving national civil service leaders from around the world, who were interviewed by Lord Gus O'Donnell. So he agreed to work with us on this, and he's the former UK Cabinet Secretary and head of the civil service. And from these fascinating interviews, 5 features of a modern, effective public service that can deliver for its citizens, even in the context of all those challenges, have emerged. And these 5 features are, so it's a strong leadership with a clear vision shared by ministers and senior officials, a highly skilled, digitally literate and thriving workforce, an agile, resilient and risk-taking public service culture, collaborative working structures that transcend organisational silos, and a civil service or a public service that's trusted by their populations in uncertain times. Now, underneath each of those 5 features, as you can imagine, there's lots of stuff to unpick. So we've identified in this initial report 4 key characteristics under each of those features, and we'll be publishing all of that in full at the Innovation Conference. But later this year, the plan is that GGF, we will convene expert workshops around each of those 5 areas to identify the good practice and expertise that's already happening in different countries and governments, so that we can share that then with civil service leaders around the world, as each of the kind of civil services and the public services that we work with continue on their own transformation programs. So this is a really exciting new area of work. And if you think you'd like to participate in any of these workshops or be part of the ongoing work on our blueprint for a modern and effective civil service in any way, then again, please do get in touch with our commercial team to discuss those opportunities. Now I'm going to hand back to Richard, who is going to speak about an issue linked to more innovative government, and that's all about improving sustainability and resilience.
Thanks, Siobhan. Yeah, we've seen, obviously, in recent years, the importance of government being resilient to shocks that they face from the coronavirus pandemic on in governments around the world, and indeed in the implementation of Brexit in the UK specifically. We've already touched on the fiscal aspect of some of the shocks that governments have faced in recent years in this session, but now to touch on some of the broader questions around resilience and in particular climate resilience and sustainability later in this little session. What we find working with governments around the world is that they have really worked to review their resilience structures, how government responds to crisis, to learn the lessons of recent years, to see what worked, particularly during COVID, and to try and build that into the systems that they have that are ready to respond in times of crisis. To kind of zero in on one example, the UK government has updated its resilience framework late last year to reflect what the Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden called the dangerous and volatile times that we all live in. And some of the elements of that updated plan are really interesting. In particular, the whole of society approach to resilience, where government is bringing together a wide range of actors from across the whole of society, not just public sector, but as broad as can be, to form a national resilience community. And out of this community, come things like the National Risk Register that the UK government updated last year, and the UK Resilience Forum that brings together groups of emergency responders. So groups ranging from emergency responders to businesses and charities to discuss the actions that are needed to respond to the risks that government face and get ready if they materialise. And we know from our work, particularly some of our webinars as well, that lots of governments around the world are adopting a similar approach, a similar risk kind of review and capability review has been undertaken in Canada as well. And it's an area where governments are really trying to prepare and invest and make sure that they are not caught out by any shocks. And in particular, some of that investment is going into prevention. Again, to use the UK as a recent example, there's been a lot of investment in cyber resilience in many areas of society, again, outside the public sector, both inside and outside the public sector, but trying to boost cyber resilience across society. That's one of the areas where prevention is better than cure, and governments are putting investment into that. There's also a link, interestingly, to one of the elements of the blueprint that Siobhan mentioned earlier. One of the things that came out of our discussions as part of that project was about the need for a strong centre in government, somebody at the centre with the responsibility to call the plays, to direct the efforts of government in a crisis, and that, you know, what governments have been dealing with in this age of polycrisis has shown the necessity of having that capability and having it ready to go. Interestingly, in that updated resilience document that I mentioned from the UK government at the end of last year, it did update its cross-government emergency management responsibilities, designating lead departments to respond to many different types of crisis. But we've found out through our research that that sort of lead department model is under huge strain, and that when it comes to a crisis, the buck stops in the centre, and governments need a strong centre to deal with that. So it's really interesting how governments are trying to structure themselves to make sure that, you know, that you can have the experts and departments kind of providing this sort of risk monitoring, but when push comes to shove, you really need the strong centre to be able to step in to provide the additional capacity and also make sure that the kind of the threat analysis is robust enough and provide the external scrutiny for that before the threat hits. And that kind of awareness of the threat and understanding on a cross-societal basis is particularly acute when it comes to thinking about climate change. The scale of the action required to get society, countries, whole economies to net zero is massive, and it requires a collaboration between many different actors in society. And lots of countries have committed to get to net zero. Most major economies have committed to get to net zero by 2050. But the most recent COP conference, the COP28 conference in December, concluded that global progress was too slow in all areas of climate action, from reducing greenhouse gas emissions to strengthening resilience to providing the financial and technological support needed to decarbonize in poorer and emerging nations. All action was too slow in all of these categories to meet the target of keeping global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees. And the conference has pledged, or countries as part of the conference pledged, to accelerate action to in their national plans by the next COP conference, by early setting out their national plans this year on how they're going to move faster to hit lower carbon emissions targets. And action on that is really critical now. It's there's long, I think, again, last year and possibly even the year before when we did this, Siobhan, we noticed the lag between the commitments and the action, and that lag is still there. And it's well past time that governments need to start implementing some of their plans to get to net zero. And the COP conference last year also urged government to take action on adaptation to improve the resilience to the impacts of a changing climate. And again, action here is lagging. There is a global goal on creating an adaptation framework to help governments know what they need to have in place to be resilient to climate threats. And that, that framework has still not been created, and there's not the finance or technology or capability building structures in place yet to help many countries build that resilience. So again, that is another area where this resilience question really needs to be answered very soon. And these are some of the challenges that governments need to take action on, and there's some ways that the government can build their resilience through digital capacity and through transformation that we'll touch on in a moment. But just to show you on the next slide some of the sustainability and resilience knowledge partner opportunities that we have. There's an upcoming webinar on how to boost state capacity, so how to make sure the state is able to respond to these crises. Again, the Finance Summit will definitely touch on how to build sustainability across public services by greening the operations of government and providing the funding and the incentives to green economic developments across society. And then we have also got a webinar coming up later this year on how to do all this equitably, how to do this in a way that carries society with it, because again, touching on the point on elections, net zero is going to probably become a contested political ground. So how do governments make sure that they can work to bring countries with them? This is an unprecedented challenge to deliver something of this scale over 25 plus years. Governments never quite managed, even attempted anything like this before, never mind managed it. So it's going to be a really difficult thing to do, and we'll bring people together on that webinar to provide some thoughts on how it might be done.
Thanks, Richard. And I think interesting what you say there, because I think it's certainly true from all the events we've done, the webinars, the conferences, the summits that we've had, that one area where officials are really going to be looking to help from the private sector and elsewhere is how do they manage those kind of long-term, really serious challenges like climate change, when, as you say, they've got elections coming up, but they've also got all these other pressures to deliver on immediate priorities as well. And I think how do you juggle both those things is becoming increasingly difficult for them. But moving on to our kind of final trend before we come on to any questions, and I see we've got some questions coming in, which is great. Please do send in any questions or comments. It can be a conversation as well that you've got. So moving on to digital transformation and AI. So I think it's safe to say that we rarely have a conversation now with governments, with officials, without some mention of the potential of artificial intelligence, both the potential benefits, but also what the risks of that might be. And AI has really developed at speed, I would say, even from when we were having this conversation last time, Rich. I think things have moved on so fast. And governments around the world are definitely looking at how they can deploy the technology. Public service leaders that we speak to are keen to embrace the use of artificial intelligence to improve delivery, so they can see the huge potential that this has to improve their service delivery, with leaders calling this technology an absolute game changer in the delivery of public services. However, as one of the leaders that we have talked to has said, most of us, as in most of officials, most of civil servants and public servants, are really behind the curve on just how they should be deploying it. So as I say, public services are already experimenting with artificial intelligence usage. And I think lots of countries now are trying to do an audit of the extent to which artificial intelligence is being used across the public sector. But leaders also admit that their thinking on this is very disorganized at the moment, and there is a sense that they're struggling to get a grip on how they kind of embrace AI, both the potential and the risks of it. So governments really need to better develop their plans to do this in a whole host of ways, but in particular through training officials on AI, on what it means, on whether they can use it in their policy areas, on the skills that they need to be able to use AI. But also, I think public servants are looking at how do they explain and reassure the public about the use of AI and the potential that this can bring for them. As one of the leaders that we work with put it, he said, I think we want to take a big, bold step of doing something at scale and also bringing the public on board and saying you will be better served by AI. And I think, I mean, I guess one of the things just to highlight is just the scale of this. I think it's a transformation in the way officials work, the way they deliver services, the world in which they're operating on a scale that kind of we have not seen before. And as I say, it's moving at such pace that I think the public sector is struggling a little bit to keep up. Huge opportunities, but certainly need help from experts and others to get this right. And this is just one area, I think, where governments are focusing on digital transformation. So as well as at the Innovation Conference that we mentioned earlier, GGF conferences across 2024 are going to be sharing insights on AI and digital transformation more broadly across the globe. So to give you a sense of some of those events, we have Government DX, which is going to be held in Washington, in DC in April. And this is going to focus on the current challenges that the US federal government is facing in its attempts to improve the use of data to drive innovation and deliver high quality services to its citizens. So leaders from across the federal government will benefit from the sharing of intelligence and the first-hand experiences of their peers, as well as to help them discover solution-based products and services from private sector partners. And sticking on that kind of data theme, which is a huge issue for our kind of civil service audience that we work with. So Public Service Data Live in London in September will bring together public servants in the UK and beyond to focus on data-driven innovations. And that will be through interactive content sessions, roundtable discussions, focused networking. So attendees will benefit from kind of cross-departmental insights, from lessons from real-life case studies and shared experiences of their peers who are all facing similar challenges. And we had at last year's Public Service Data Live, we had fantastic speakers and excellent feedback from that event. And then there's also Accelerate Gov in Ottawa in Canada in the autumn. And this attracts some of the most influential digital leaders from both the public and the private sectors globally, creating an unparalleled networking experience. This has been happening for several years now. So it's established, we get great attendance, great speakers. And the event unites all of those within the public sector with the common goal of improving the use of data to better serve their customers. So all of these events bring together public servants from around the world who are really at the cutting edge of transformation. And all of these events have commercial opportunities for knowledge partners to join in these high-level conversations. So again, please do get in touch with Matt, whose details we will send you and you had on the screen, or any of us for more information. And finally, just before we go to questions, because I see that we do have some questions going in. I mean, I mentioned AI there just to say, I think it's safe to say AI is probably the issue that comes up on the most regular basis at the moment in all of the events that we do. And Global Government Forum runs a series of training courses and webinars on digital transformation, including a training session later this month that will provide an interactive workshop to introduce civil service professionals to the world of AI, providing insight on how to integrate it into their day-to-day role. Because as I say, it really is this issue where it's new to some people, but it's kind of happening so quickly. It's kind of coming before they're ready for it. So you should have information there on some of the training courses that we are offering. But I think that's already kind of taken up quite a lot of time with just Richard and myself talking. Over to all of you for questions. Richard, I'm going to put some of these questions to you, if that's all right, that we already have coming in. So the first question that we've got is, how do you think, or how do you envision AI transforming the daily operations and decision-making processes of civil servants globally in the next decade, and what are the main challenges raised by public service leaders in that research report that we mentioned on a modern civil service?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think we know AI is coming, as you say, Siobhan. It's coming quickly to all of society, really, but obviously government will have to engage with it as well. I think at the moment, I think the point that came out of the research that we already touched on is that government thinking around this is quite disorganized at the moment, and it's not just in the research report where we found that. Another part of what we do is roundtable conversations, and we held an AI roundtable conversation late last year, and it was very striking that a lot of different government departments in the UK are looking at AI and trying to do experiments with it, to do it, try various pilot projects to see how it can be made useful. But they are all kind of doing that themselves a little bit. There's no central coordination. There wasn't at that time central coordination to say, why doesn't this department, which has these use cases, try it this way? Why doesn't this department, which has a different set of use cases, try it this way? And we'll work out what works best. There was a little bit of repetition in different parts of the UK government trying similar approaches to AI. And from that conversation, I know there was an effort to kind of join it up, to provide a sort of central repository of what different parts of government are doing, to coordinate some of the initiatives a bit better and coordinate some of the things that they learn from them. That, I think, is going to be a real challenge. There is always a sense of, do you know, let 1,000 flowers bloom, and hopefully the best things will get picked up, and the things that don't work won't. But it's a little bit inefficient, that, and it can mean that even some successes don't get picked up by the system sometimes. So I think we've heard quite a lot about, from the people we speak to, about the need to coordinate how government is approaching AI, how it's trying to deploy it, where it's trying to find these use cases. And in terms of the sort of day-to-day work of public servants, again, it's a little bit early to tell. There's some reticence around allowing public servants, I think, to use commercially available tools like ChatGPT and things like that around security concerns that follow from that. What, again, comes out of a lot of our conversations is the need for government data to be ready to be used by AI systems. That it can be the data that government collects, if it is stored correctly, labeled correctly, up to date, it can be fed into AI systems, and that can both provide services to the user, provide the users with up-to-date information when they query ChatGPT or something, but it can also unlock insights, provide information on what works and what doesn't. That's the kind of areas where government really needs to get its data into a position where it's ready for AI, and that's a sort of long-standing challenge in government, is getting its data in a way that it can be analysed and manipulated and understood by public servants, and that pressure is only going to grow when you look at the potential for AI. So there really is a kind of few different pieces of this jigsaw that all come together, and I think it is interesting that some of them are an accentuation of kind of other issues that governments have around transformation. As you say, we've got the Government Transformed podcast that we've just launched last week, talking about digital lessons in digital transformation in government. We've got some great conversations, just the start of that series that we've done in partnership with Visa, great conversations about how to do digital transformation in government. And yeah, I think AI will kind of accentuate some of the challenges, but also the opportunities as well in terms of making change happen.
Well, on that, there's a great question, follow-up question really coming from Alison McHarg. And Alison has said, is there a risk-averse approach to AI? And is the fast-moving nature of it meaning that departments get caught in a mix of being worried about rolling out solutions too quickly, but also an element of fear of missing out, making decision-making too rapid? So are they kind of caught in this middle ground?
I think they are, and again, it's one of the things that came out in our in some of the roundtable conversations we had last year. That the fear of missing out isn't just from officials; it's a fear of missing out from politicians and from secretaries of state who hear about the potential of AI. So there's a lot of demand side impetus, shall we say, in the system to use AI in government, because people are hearing so much about it. And yes, I think that there is a certain element of fear of missing out that's driving a lot of these pilots, and that's where I think there's potential for that greater joining up of the work that is going on. The element of worry, I think, and again, this has come up in a couple of our webinars, is making sure that both public servants, the frontline public servants for whom AI could be game-changing in terms of their own efficiency, and the service users in the general public are confident in AI systems. We had a webinar last year about some of the ethics around artificial intelligence, and one of the case studies in that was a UK council where they had deployed AI, but the frontline council officials who used the system, I think they were social workers, weren't confident in the results and in what the AI system was telling them. So that meant that the uptake wasn't as great as it might have been. There's a lot of hypothetical efficiencies here. They're only going to become real efficiencies if people trust the system and make the changes that are required to unlock them. So that I think is another factor. But there are lots of issues in play here, as you say, Siobhan. It comes up in every conversation we have nowadays, and there's a lot of parts to the conversations.
And those conversations around how do we actually meet those challenges? How does the public sector meet all of those challenges with limited resources? So there is definitely a school of thought, which is to say they aren't going to be able to meet those challenges without embracing these new technologies, because AI has the potential to increase in efficiency so significantly that people really do want to grasp it and deliver those great services. And also, I think there's a sense we've learned from our kind of webinars and talking to the leaders that we talk to, that they know the public want the same kind of service in their public services as they get in kind of Amazon and Google, and they're going to have to use technology to do that. But as you say, there are so many things that public servants don't yet know about AI and some of those potential risks that they really are stuck, I think, in the middle. So great question from Alison there. We've got another question come in from I really apologize if I get the pronunciation wrong, but it's Hassan Zunaman Zaman, I think. And they have asked, as a result of elections, what is the likelihood of policy shifts or shocks in 2024? And if yes, are there some examples? As you say, Richard, given that over half of the voting world, half of the countries in the voting world will be going to the polls, I think there is definitely a likelihood of policy shifts or shocks. But also, I think, so I'll leave you to answer that question, but I think there's also, coming back maybe to some of the risks of AI, there is this potential for some technologies also to disrupt democracies as well. And that's something that countries and governments are really aware of in some of the most recent conversations we've had as well. But your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on the outcome in a lot of those cases, but obviously the United States is top of that list. If as seems likely, President Trump is the Republican nominee, he will stand a 50-50 probably chance of getting back in. It's quite, some of the polls are quite volatile just now, but he's leading in some of them, and that the difficulty sometimes with working out what a second term of President Trump would be is matching the rhetoric to the action. But if the United States removed its support for Ukraine, then that would lead to certainly a geopolitical shock. It would lead to a lot of questions amongst NATO countries that also border Russia in their confidence in the military alliance. There are plans that Trump, as a candidate this time round, has put forward about introducing some fairly large import tariffs on all goods that come into the United States. That would be a massive economic shock, both in the United States domestically and in the rest of the world, if that was to be introduced. And then we've got obviously the President Trump's personal demeanor, shall we say, the fact he can move markets and governments just with a few presses of a keyboard behind a Twitter account. So I mean that is kind of chief amongst them, and there's a lot of concern. Again, it came out in some of our interviews for that Blueprint report about how government alliances and geopolitics are going to change in the years ahead, and you know, even post-Trump, if we end up there, is the United States going to be a reliable actor, or is this move towards more populist politics permanent and going to have implications on how governments need to plan their own defence and security in the years ahead? On the other side of the scale, in the UK, the Labour Party is almost going out of its way to make everybody think that it will be a shock-free move to a Labour government if that comes ahead. It's very far ahead in the polls. That might tighten when we get into the election, but it's trying to minimise all areas of controversy and present themselves as essentially the government in waiting. So there will, even in 1997, when Labour pulled off a similar trick, it then went ahead with Bank of England independence just a few days later. There will doubtless be big changes that follow the introduction of a Labour government, but it's the old adage of known unknowns and unknown unknowns a little bit. We kind of know what we don't quite know on terms of what Trump might do, just on some of his statements, and the areas where we think he might make progress. There's areas where the unexpected will then appear if the last few years have told us anything.
Just to add, I think across Europe more broadly, it's interesting, the politics there, to see how that will play out. You mentioned, I think, when we were going through the trends, how net zero might become a kind of a political ground, I think, running up to the elections, and how maybe that might favour maybe parties more on the right. I think so. How that might change the makeup of the parties in the European Union, for example, will be very interesting over the coming years.
That is a very interesting point, and sometimes I think, with my kind of politics observer hat on, that's kind of feels like it's inevitable, as if it's a law of politics that will happen. But Australia is a very interesting example where a liberal pro net zero party put big dents into the incumbent government at the last election and helped them lose their majority. So there's a lot of there are countervailing forces in that direction as well.
Thanks. There was a response from Alison just to say, yes, everything moves so quickly that some plugins and solutions disappear or evolve before you can actually understand the benefits. It's a complex situation, tying up ethics, nervousness around data, etc. So I think really agreeing with all those things we're saying about how challenging it is for civil servants at the moment. Great question coming from NASA as well. NASA has asked, the cost of governance and compliance has risen exponentially for cloud solutions and AI, which can be a major barrier for entry for SME. What provision is there in the future of wider participation of smaller companies to contribute towards public sector contracts? We have had this on some of our webinars as well, haven't we, Richard?
Yeah, absolutely. It comes up quite a lot. And the UK in this instance is the country I know best in terms of its procurement rules. There's been quite a long-standing government policy, certainly since the coalition days. It may have gone back even to the last Labour government, to increase the amount that government buys from SMEs. I think the target initially was a third, and that was surpassed. It may be up now to kind of 40 pence in the pound. So there is a real acknowledgement in the UK government, I think, that SMEs bring a lot of innovation to government procurement competitions, that they can bring in new ideas, new technology. It also matches up, that particular kind of statistics match up with the period of time where government was moving away from sort of big bang transformations anyway, and trying to build more agile approaches that didn't involve, one large service provider. In other countries, I know the statistics less well, but I know there's definite willingness to go on a similar journey to involve smaller businesses in the transformation and digitization work of government. It's definitely something that comes up a lot in the US and Canada, and there will be SME representatives and parts of the conversations around both Government DX and Accelerate Gov that will touch on procurement and bringing in that knowledge from the wider ecosystem into government. It's something that comes up an awful lot, and yes, a lot of, as I touched on earlier about data, a lot of these systems are going to be dependent on government data being accessible and usable, and that all then moves into conversations about cloud and how you store the data and where government can access it and make use of it. So there's a lot of interest in the best, most innovative solutions for that.
And a related question from Sophie has come in, so also on government contracts and procurement. Do you have predictions for social value in government contracts in 2024?
It's one of those things I have covered it quite a bit in a couple of different roles I've done. It's so difficult, again, to use a UK example, to make social value bite as a contract term in government, because everything comes down to the bottom line quite quickly, even when the competitions are set up in a way that allows for accounting for social value and broader impacts and training and skills.
Set up, aren't they? They are built into the system now. There is more focus given to social value, but I think, as you say, it's how do you measure that, and how do you make sure that in the lifespan of that contract it's actually followed through, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It is there, it is accounted for and things like that. But yes, there is both the issue of making sure it happens over a long-term contract, or whatever the length of contract is. That does involve monitoring. Interestingly, when you speak to people involved in commercial teams in governments, they say they're actually better at letting the contract. They were relatively confident in the process, the actual procurement processes that they put in place, and think they will broadly lead to good outcomes. They're less good at monitoring it and making sure that the suppliers actually do what they have said they will do, and that the purchaser makes that happen. But I think there is also and it is in competitions that these things are accounted for, but there are also times where the money just dictates the price of the price of the good and the price of the service, the amount that they're able to budget for it, again over a medium-term time horizon, when government departmental budgets are not set from much in excess of 3 years, and definitely not in excess of 5 in electoral cycles. They sometimes just have to go with the most cost-effective option rather than the most society-effective option.
And also, they're also factoring, like we've mentioned, that whole range of other things. So to what extent does it meet net zero requirements, and all of those things are all factors. So many things now that come into play. That's
going to be a huge thing. Again, that's where it does begin, like I was saying about the other thing about the net zero plans, it does begin to have to bite. It has. Procurement is one of the ways that government can drive the behaviour change that it needs to drive across wider society to make net zero happen. So it has to kind of go up in the priority list. It's a very good prompt to me to go look into this, because I'm not actually sure what Labour's policy is on social value in procurement. I will look into that.
So come back to our next one, Sophie, and we'll have the answer for you on this one. I'm not making any assumptions about the election, of course, but our final question, I think, and this has come in about productivity. So the question is about how can we begin to measure productivity, or how can the public sector measure productivity across its huge range of organisations and agencies, different policy areas, for example? Is it possible for the public sector to learn from the private sector when it comes to increasing productivity, or is this specifically a challenge for the public sector? And also, just finally, are there countries that are doing this well?
It is a massive challenge. I've done recently some work on productivity, and I found out that in most parts of central government, there are no again, this is UK, and the UK is leading on this, I think, for reasons I will come to. There is no measure of efficiency, really, or productivity. The Office of National Statistics, which produces the public sector productivity figures, assumes that the inputs in central government match the outputs. There's no other calculation that it has at the moment to see if the inputs are leading to better outputs. If you put in £1, you get more than £1 out, or if you put in £1, you get less than £1 of value out. That exercise does happen in the health service, where there is a understanding of the impact of certain types of treatment and the quality of those, and how much your pound of healthcare or buys you. There is likewise some analysis of that around broader social care, and I think in education. But in central government, it's basically a one-for-one calculation that the ONS does. Now, interestingly, the Treasury has asked the Office of National Statistics to look into this, to say how can we actually better understand productivity in the public sector, and in central government in particular. That work is ongoing. It is a massive piece of work. The work that led to that kind of analysis in the health service that I mentioned, about working out which treatments are more cost effective and beginning to make some of those calculations, what was the work of years, 3 or 4 years, I think that process took. And again, the UK was definitely the first nation to do that work, to put in those productivity figures for the health service. I think other nations have since done similar, but I think, again, we are probably leading in terms of looking at how you can measure that in central government. And it's really, really difficult to be able to capture the information in a way that can measure productivity in a way that kind of, as we would understand it. One way to square the circle, and I don't know if this is where the government review will end up, is to look at things like defining the purpose of a government department. So what is it there to do, and what are the outcomes that meet that purpose? and then you can begin to go down the flow chart to get to what are the things that affect that outcome that we can prioritize. And then you're not focusing so much on outputs, the simple translation of a pound of input into a pound of output, but you're looking at the things that kind of drive the organization's reason for being. And that's where there's quite a lot of interesting work going on, but it's very difficult to do at an organizational scale, and then it's even more difficult to kind of convert into productivity calculations. But there's a lot of interesting thinking going on there just now, and it's something that we were keeping a close eye on.
Right, and I'm sure it probably is an area where the public sector could learn from the private sector, and where they could work together on sharing kind of good practice as well.
Absolutely.
Richard, thank you so much for your questions today. Thank you to everybody who was listening to this for sending in those great questions as well. I'm just looking at the clock, and I think we have come to the end of our time. I do appreciate that we ran through a lot of information in that hour. So we've just put back on the screen the contact details for you. But as I said, we will share with everybody all of the slides that we ran through today. You'll have all that information in your inboxes after this session. Richard, anything you would like to add before we close? But I mean, just from me, a huge thanks to the audience, but thank you to you for sharing all your expertise as well. And a final kind of reminder to everybody listening, if you want to get involved in anything, if you think there's anything that you would like to support or learn more about, then please do get in touch with us and we can start that conversation.
Yeah, please do get in touch. Thank you everybody for watching along. I really enjoy these conversations, particularly when we get lots of interesting questions like that lead me to rack my brain and remember things from the dim and distant past. So yes, thank you everybody. It's been a very interesting session, and yeah, please, we hope to hear from you soon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. Thanks everyone. Goodbye. See you soon.